All right. Well, thank you everyone for showing up today. Good attendance. Um, I'm going to be talking about, what were kind of the biggest things that were announced during the Databricks conference. They call it the Data and AI Summit that happened 4 weeks ago, just about a month ago, almost exactly now. So there's going to be a main theme that we'll talk about shortly here, but it's mostly revolving around that first word, agents. And I'm great with rambling. So if there's any questions or anything that come up during any part, just speak up, raise your hand, whatever. I'm glad to answer questions. And there's time at the end too, of course. So first I want to talk about what Databricks did at the summit itself, just to kind of kick it off. We had about 10 people, if I'm count correctly, in attendance, with over 30,000 people total at the conference from all across the globe. It was a huge conference. They took over the entire, they call it the Moscone Center. It's the big conference center right where it's located. Last year they did like 3 out of 4 buildings. This year they used like all 4 buildings. So it grew a lot from last year. Asif Bakar, CEO and president, he got an award for partner sales session for an industry use case. Do you want to talk about that at all, Asif? Or you're in the middle of eating pizza. I got you on the spot. I think you got a soccer ball, right?
The whole event was about, talking about use cases where Databricks AI could be used. And we talked about use cases that we're working on with a client, which is first notice of loss for insurance carriers when they get these documents, how to use AI to extract data out of it and then put it for review to whomever is reviewing the data. And if the data looks good, it goes straight to the claims management system. Right, so that's what we described. With the whole team of it, I knew the use case, so they were asked to team. I just put it together. So the team was sitting there, and I told the team, I said, "You guys are all useless. I'm the one writing."
Hey, that's why you got the award.
I finished it first, so when they read through it, they said, "Hey, who wants to speak about it?" I spoke about it. That's how we got
Nice, awesome. So yeah, while Asif was doing that, myself and a couple engineers at the company, I don't think any of them are here today. We did a hackathon. Last year it was 1 day. This year it was 2 days. The prompt was essentially make like a kind of like a referral agent on Indian healthcare data. So we got kind of a intentionally messy data set. So we had to clean it up. We made an agent on top of it, and this was all within Databricks. They also gave us a bunch of Cortex, or not Cortex, OpenAI Codex credits. There's so many different AI names, and they all sound the same, to help with that. So we were able to make an app quickly off the ground with that, and put it on the Databricks. So it's a fun event. It was a lot more work over 2 days than 1 day, but it was a lot of fun. Then we also hosted a connection event at a bar, so we got to meet with a bunch of other engineers. Interestingly enough, there's plenty around the area. There's some guys from Milwaukee Tool there and some other local companies that we got to interact with, plus, all around the area too, because this is a pretty global event. So overall, Databricks had a good showing at the summit this year. So now let's talk about everything that was announced, and there's a lot. There's some main bullet points here. This isn't going to be absolutely everything. This is my kind of curated list of what I thought was most interesting, and then there's going to be kind of a rapid fire at the end where I list off kind of a bunch of announcements all at once. So first, there's a bunch of things on here. We're going to talk about Genie Ontology, the new real-time engine, Omnigent, the new open source software from Databricks, serverless micro apps, Genie Zero Ops. Lakeflow had a whole bunch of updates. When we get to that section, there's going to be a whole bunch, so I only talk about a few specific things around it. But yeah, as I mentioned, there's a overall theme throughout the whole entire summit. As I was doing research for this, make sure I knew about everything that was announced and stuff, I came across this one article that phrased it this way: enterprise AI has a context problem, not an intelligence problem. Essentially, all the models, whoever you're getting it from, whether it's OpenAI, Claude, or Grok or Gemini, they've all gotten to a more or less good enough state. They can always improve, but the main problem now is getting them the right context at the right time. So what tables to query, what specific definitions mean for your enterprise. I have the example of what net revenue means within a certain company's context, and the actions agents are allowed to do with it. So 4 main themes kind of came out of this: context, cost, control, and choice. Context, that's kind of the main thing, is getting agents the knowledge they need so they can act upon it. That's kind of feeds into the Genie Ontology we'll talk about with OntoRank. Then we also have a lot of control surfaces. One of Databricks' main things that it loves to promote is all the governance it has around it. Unity Catalog is one of its main products. Basically, you can govern anything, put really fine-tuned access controls on every element that's within Databricks, and including some outside of Databricks too. Cost, this was talked about a little bit before we started, but one of the main themes is you pay for what you use and not for infrastructure, essentially. So you pay for use, not for infrastructure. That was another theme, and some of the micro apps, serverless jobs, a few other things we'll talk about kind of lean on to that theme. The last one that wraps Omnigent, the new Iceberg standard, and open sharing altogether, which all of these I'll talk about. This is just prepping as we go in. Those allow you to choose, be independent of a certain model provider, be able to share formats between platforms. Interoperability is kind of the main idea there. So the first big announcement, Genie Ontology. This is essentially a automatically built context layer built on top of a lot of technologies Databricks already has. So Genie used to kind of just mean this one specific tool, which is now called Genie Spaces. Genie is now a more overarching name for all of their kind of agentic products that they offer. So Genie Ontology is a new one they announced. I don't believe it's out yet. I think it's going to come out soon. Essentially, what this will do is there is a tool they have called Lakeflow connectors, and that allows you to easily pull data out of external sources, non-Databricks stuff that you don't have in Databricks. This builds on top of that, builds on top of what you have in Databricks, and it builds essentially a knowledge graph of everything it has. So this layer is going to be what powers a lot of the kind of, I guess, next gen agentic workflows on Databricks. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff with this. So this layer here is more building that knowledge. So grabbing everything it can, putting it together into one centralized place. Now, when an agent goes to try to use this knowledge, it needs to know what's actually important. Because if you're just pulling in data from absolutely every direction, there's going to be a lot of junk along the way. So they developed a ranking algorithm called OntoRank. So essentially, when an agent reaches out to, I'll talk about it more in a second, but essentially, Ontology is going to be a glorified MCP server. So you can really attach it. I mean, they want you to attach it to all the Genie stuff, but you can really attach it to anything, any other model, since it's just an MCP server. So let's say, we're looking for some net revenue stats on the company. We have some query about net revenue. It hits Ontology. It tries to find some info. A whole bunch of results come back. This ranking then kicks in to figure out what's best, what's worst, what's most relevant based on kind of the metadata of the sources. So, who made it, how used it is, and how often the data's updated. Those are some of the main points, but there's a bunch of other points in this algorithm. So, for example, let's say we have a Scratch notebook that it found sitting in somebody's workspace in Databricks. It computed some net revenue. It was kind of thrown away. It was made years ago. It's not really that relevant. So that kind of ends up at the bottom of the list. We then there's this executive dashboard. It's still used pretty often, 300 views a week, except the owner left in March. So it hasn't really had any updates since then, but it's still used a little bit. So there's some relevance there, but not an insane amount of relevance. And then, the top source for this kind of net revenue query would be the actual gold net revenue table. It's our certified gold table. Everybody's querying it. Every system's querying this table to get revenue info. It's refreshed all the time. Yeah, you have a question?
So it sounds like all of this is like the ontology itself and the rankings are all kind of auto-generated.
Yeah, that's kind of the whole thing. And in a second, I'm going to compare it against Palantir's ontology stuff.
There is like the human, a lot of these things are.
Yeah, there's a thing we'll talk about near the end called Genie Zero Ops, which hits right on that human in the loop part. But the whole ontology thing, it's all auto-generated. So it's going to go out for you. It's going to passively in the background pull those sources in, make the knowledge graph on its own. This system, at least how they propose it so far, isn't meant to be like manually tuned whatsoever. This is all automatically generated. So it's figuring out the relevance based on the sources that it finds.
So here, it's figuring out relevance based on how many people, how many jobs are being executed.
Yeah. So it's using, in Databricks, it keeps track of everybody that's touching the table, when it was last updated, based looking at the table history. So all that kind of metadata around the info, because, looking at these three here, they probably touch on the same data points, but in terms of which one's most relevant, it looks at the metadata, who's using it. So yeah, any other questions right now? All right, sounds good. Keep moving on. So where I think they're kind of leaning towards, and I kind of hinted at it a second ago, is, this is all automatically generated. This is meant to be plugged into everything, but I think this is moving away from our hand curated Genie spaces, which are like, you make the context, you give the example queries, you have to keep it up to date so it doesn't drift over time. Now with the ontology, I think what they're leaning toward is now this is all an automated process that you just plug your model into, rather than maintaining it itself. So I think that's going to turn more into like a curation point of view rather than a creation point of view. So,
Tyler, quick question.
Yeah.
Right, so Genie Spaces, when it first came out and describe it to users, one of the examples we would say, hey, you could put your context, let's say your annual year starts on February. So if you ask for, give me my annual revenue, it will go from February through January 31st, right? So what happens to that manual?
it still has a place.
Hey,
So,
Tyler, can you restate the question? 12 people online.
oh yeah.
It's coming from your
So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the question was, where does Genie Spaces fit in now that ontology's here? Or?
The manual context
Yes.
that we used to provide, where does that fit into?
Where does the manual
automation?
context plug into
Right.
this? So,
And similarly, just adding to that, you can repeat that, right? Like table names are not always recognized. So how do you give context to
right. And
those two questions?
in my opinion, so yeah, the question is, where does manual context fit in this new ontology world? And
Table names.
And table names, all the metadata. How do we define that now? And Databricks has built-in mechanisms at the table level to document it there. There's still going to be that manual, making a context for, I think, specific workflows. So they're kind of leading more towards agents. So the agent is going to be doing a specific task. So you're going to be still making manual context so it knows how to do that specific task. But I think less of the general knowledge is now going to be fed through ontology. So you don't need to explain it every little detail about your company anymore. That can be dealt through this automatic ontology layer, but specifically, how to fill out a specific form and who to send it to, doing the actual actions with our agents, that's where that context is really going to become important. So instead of just building a general knowledge based on the company, now it's going to be tuning, that context is going to be tuned for a specific use case. Does that help answer your question?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So as I mentioned, Genie Ontology, it's going to be plugging into all the different Genie products. So Genie agents, as I mentioned, that's how you make, that's one of the ways you can make agents on Databricks. Genie Code, that's a built-in coding agent. If you use Claude Code, OpenAI Codex, same idea, just built into the Databricks platform. Genie One, this used to be called Databricks One. This is essentially, if you've ever seen like a Claude Cowork, essentially you talk to Claude, it can do actions for you, it can integrate into other services, once an email with some actions. That's kind of where Genie One's going. So one thing I've noticed as I was putting this together is a lot of the ideas and the new stuff that Databricks is going is things you might have seen, or at least in some implementation elsewhere, that's now being put into one centralized platform. So there's a tool I'm going to talk about later that's essentially a vibe coding app builder. If you ever seen an app like Base 45 or 42, whatever they call it, it operates similar to that. Is there a question? No. Yeah. This is the idea here is Genie Ontology is going to plug into everything and generate behind the scenes.
And then instead of separate Genie spaces, there will just be a Genie One that runs again.
So yeah, Genie One is meant for more of, I guess, a non-technical user. So it used to be called Databricks One. So it's this general non-technical user space, but they kind of now wrapped it under the Genie label. So now when you go there, it's called Genie One, and it's a text box you come to. And it's going to have all that general knowledge that's built from the ontology to plug into. So any like general ad hoc question you might have about net revenue is that example I keep using. You can just throw it in there. It can figure out the context and relevance based on everything it's seen and be able to provide a somewhat decent answer. But then, as I was explaining with Asa's question, a more detailed like, oh, I need X, Y, and Z to happen when ABC after ABC, that leans more towards the agents and that manual context.
And so for Genie Space like today, you might have like a marketing Genie Space or product Genie Space. So would product users and marketing users all go through the Genie? Like, are they doing away with Genie Spaces?
No, they're still doing Genie Spaces, but I think for more of a general flow, they're definitely leaning more towards on Genie One. So that's going to be more of the entry point, but you can still plug in, okay, here's a Genie Space specifically that we hand tuned for marketing.
Okay.
But if a new marketing person comes in, they have a landing page with a relative, using the ontology that they have a place to start with.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. One thing I did want to compare is I recently listened to the biography of Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir. So one of the foundational things of Palantir's technology is their ontology. So essentially they come in, they build a huge ontology about what your business is, what actions you can do, what things you can do, what items are in your business that matter, and it builds a huge kind of knowledge graph. But they all have to do that all manually. So I just thought this was an interesting comparison because Genie Ontology is definitely built for, read-only agentic workflow. So this is just kind of knowledge to be used by agentic processes. While Foundry Ontology is more for like, you can write back to it, you can update it, you can manually tune it yourself. So it can be a lot more optimized, but it's for kind of a different use case. That's more of like automating certain workflows and takes a lot of upfront investment, especially from Palantir engineers themselves. And it's not really automated at all. You have a question, Oleg?
Yeah, no, more of a comment. Last week they did actually rename Genie Spaces to Genie Agents.
To Genie Agent. Yeah. I thought to say the name, they love to change the names all the time. So yeah, Genie Space is now called Genie Agents because they want you to make agents in the Genie Space and not just like a chat bot, basically. So yeah, that's one of the reoccurring themes. Everything you're going to see is going to be either empowering you to make agents, or it's going to be a proprietary, and that might not be the right word, but a Databricks product that is an agent to do stuff for you. So this one talks a little bit about agents, but this is probably the least agent-related one. So the entire Lakehouse, they're trying to move towards a more real-time context. So this is Lakehouse real-time. It's powered by a new engine called Reyden, which, from what I remember from the keynote, the team lead who is designing it, his name's Ray. This is his dream engine. So Ray, D-E-N, Reyden. So that's where the name comes from. But essentially, one problem that I see all the time, especially where I currently work, is a lot of reverse ETL processes. So there's these old apps that are, they've been using SQL Server forever. That's how they interact with all their data. So they want some, we have data in the Lakehouse that can supplement some of their activities, or maybe make a dashboard on that app. So they ask us to push that data into the SQL Server so they have a low latency copy that they can push to whatever they need to for the app. Now with Lakehouse Real-Time, this specific example, so there's lots of issues with this. There's latency in pushing that data to the external source. Now there's two security models. You got your SQL Server that has one security model, then you have Unity Catalog with its own security model that you got to keep in check. So now with Lakehouse Real-Time, we can essentially squash that all into one API call that can interact with the Lakehouse directly in near real time. So now the apps can kind of bypass that whole replication process, interact with the Lakehouse in real time. And they showed some like crazy stats on stage for this. So if you've ever queried Databricks, even on a small table, there's some overhead. So you hit run, maybe after 2 seconds, the things pop up. They were showing response times of under 100 milliseconds consistently across the board. Small data sets, it was about 10 milliseconds. They had a really cool demo where the team lead, his name's Ray, he set up like essentially just a for loop to spawn a whole bunch of agents, and they all started querying the same table at the same time. And every single agent maintained the sub 100 millisecond response time. So it was a really cool like live demo they did. They're claiming, so all these numbers are coming from Databricks. I don't believe this is out yet either. It's one of those like in the next few weeks or next few months it's going to come out. But they're claiming a 16 times, speed improvement versus like other real-time stacks. So whether that's, what I described, reverse ETL to a SQL server or some proprietary, in-memory cache mechanism like Redis or something to keep that. So this is really cool, and this is going to empower, agents, of course, because if everything on Databricks is going to agents, where everybody's making agents, agents are going to be querying your Lakehouse constantly. So, this is really good for your high concurrency dashboards. If you need like a kind of a centralized API to read your governed tables off of, you can now feed it from the Reyden engine, the Lakehouse real time. Replacing reverse ETL, as I mentioned, agent workloads. This still isn't replacing a transactional system. This is still just a read-only system. This is for quick reads. This isn't for writing data. This is just really quick reads. And it's still in beta, as I mentioned, so it's not publicly out yet, but this is a cool thing to keep your eye on as it keeps going. All right, another cool agent tool. So this is a new open source software from Databricks themselves, and soon it'll have a managed version on Databricks that also isn't publicly out yet. It's called Omnigent, and what this is they call it a meta harness. And what that really means is a harness is like Claude Code or OpenAI Codex. It's, they have a software wrapped around their model to automate coding in those cases. It's an agent, so the agent harness is all the software around making the model be able to edit files and have all the tools it needs to do so it knows how to do its job to edit code. So this meta harness adds an abstraction layer on top of it. So now you can isolate your different, there's a sandbox isolation here, so these agents can run within their own context. You can easily switch between them. So if you have, history and memory and whatnot, and you want to, I've been using Claude Code, it's a pain to switch over to Codex if you're going back and forth. This, you can just hit it with a button like you're switching a model in like a Claude or OpenAI ChatGPT, because they have different models. So this is the same kind of idea, but now on the harness level. So this is like Claude Code, tooling agents, going back to that agent theme. And what this is really leaning towards is Agentbricks, which is kind of a catch-all name for all the agent stuff, agent tools on Databricks. So on Databricks, Genie agents is what Genie Space is called now. You can build agents in many different ways on Databricks. So this is going to be kind of that layer on top to evaluate and test them quickly. So you have your agents with a bunch of special tools. You build that on Databricks. You go to Omnigent. You can run like a comparison query. So you can run two agents at once to see how their ratings compare, how their responses compare, and whatnot. There's a lot of cool controlling in this. It's all like a YAML kind of metadata base, so you can update it through code. There's a UI editor and stuff too. But some of the cool policies and cost controls you can do on this is you can set like per session cost caps on certain agents. You can build agents directly in this too, using like YAML if you really wanted to. And then one of the really cool things that I like is the contextual policies. So this is essentially saying, this is a dynamic policy is what I'll kind of call it. So if something happens during your session, you can have some behavior change. So, if during your session you've read some PII data, you read a data lake table that had a column marked PII. Now, since that happened, you can block all like external sending of data of any form, like whatever tools you have, whether like this example is, you read PII, don't send emails, whether that's like sending Slack message, T messages, whatever the tool is, you can set rules like that so you don't accidentally leak PII info. So this is, I think the contextual policies, and there's another tool that they have that's more on Databricks called the Unity AI Gateway, which I kind of mentioned at the end. And they're adding similar policies and cost controls to that mechanism too. So, it goes with the theme, controlling everything, governing everything, and agents, of course. All right. So now we're going to talk about serverless micro apps quickly. These are kind of interesting. So, Databricks has had apps, but they're still the big clunky apps. They can scale to 0. They take a few minutes to boot up. What these are designed for are very like bursty, workloads. So one off the cuff example, let's say you have some like form app that does some automated process once you complete the form, once you press enter. Maybe you're an insurance agent, you need to fill out this form. It takes a minute to fill out the form. You do it every other day, something along those lines. You're only doing it every once in a while. So with these micro VMs, you can now scale those apps to 0, so they don't cost you anything when they're at 0. And then when you need them, they come online in a few seconds rather than a few minutes. And then they can turn off as fast as you would like them to. So this goes with the whole usage only billing. So it's only going to bill you when somebody's actually on the app and not when it's just sitting there. Like, a standard app today, if you have go on Azure, you spin up a VM, you throw your app on there, it sits 24/7, even if nobody's using it for 3 hours. So this is for those really niche apps. So this is a whole special framework under the hood to make these really small and fast. So this isn't going to support your monolithic React app that does everything across your company, but this is going to support maybe a certain function that you can scale to 0. But another use for this goes back to agents. I mentioned earlier that they have what's called now the Genie App Builder. So you can vibe code an app directly on Databricks. I don't think it's out yet, again, with most of this, but it's coming soon. So you can go to a chat, you can ask it, hey, I want this app to do X, Y, and Z. Read these 3 tables, and it'll build it. Same thing if you ask kind of Claude Code or anybody else or any other agent to, make an app for you. It's the same kind of idea now, just within Databricks on your data using Genie. So again, you can plug this in, the Genie App Builder into that ontology we were talking about before, so it has a better understanding of everything that's going on at your enterprise. Another smaller thing they added is a concept called app spaces. Kind of goes into the vibe coding area. Essentially, you can group a whole bunch of apps under a single kind of catalog, think of it. So all the apps go under one label, under one group. And so if you need to put any governance or policies on a whole host of apps, especially if you have you have a whole department that decided it's this quarter, they're vibe coding apps like crazy. So you can set cost controls and policies on one level, and that cascades down to all the apps within, the app space is what they call that. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, and one of the other things is called Genie Zero Ops. So 0 is going to come up for another thing also. This idea here is if something goes wrong with your pipeline at 2 a.m., whenever it is, Genie will automatically sit down and try to figure out what the issue is and do the triage for you. So, it'll watch the job. It's going to look back through the lineage of the data, what code brought it here, what Git repos are used, what data feeds into it. It'll find that whole lineage. It'll draft up a fix, and it'll test it in a cloned environment. So clone all your data. It'll run your pipeline in a kind of a shallow clone environment, make sure it works in there. And then at the end, human in the loop, this is where you come in. Nothing auto merge. This is, so then, if I'm the on-call guy and it's 2 a.m., now I can see what Zero Ops proposed to me instead of, sleep deprived trying to figure out what the issue was. So I think this is a very interesting idea. And again, this is in private preview is what I have it marked as. So I think you can enable this one. But I think there's some caveats to think of with this because, as Ontology comes out, it'll probably get better. But I think some things, so, good things is it's going to test everything. It's going to look through your code. It knows the whole lineage. Things that you might want to hold back on, shallow clone isn't the whole production workload. So maybe it'll work because it moved data from A to B and that transition worked, but maybe that kind of broke something way downstream that it doesn't know about, especially if you're doing the client I work for, they have many different platforms in use. So sometimes the whole lineage isn't within Databricks. So it'll go out to Snowflake. Genie Zero Ops isn't going to know about any of the Snowflake stuff unless you plug it in and do all the work to get it to know about it. Another issue that could happen is, humans could just not review the code. Maybe you have some unit tests or whatever that they all go green and it's 2 a.m. He goes, all right, it looks good. And then, he wakes up 6 hours later and it's caused an even worse problem. So that kind of goes in that last part, if the fix that's applied happens, who's like the responsibility unit of when that goes wrong. Because now it's just, because it's probably going to go back to you who pressed the, yeah, this looks good at 2 a.m. But there's a lot of questions there. But another thing kind of to highlight is they also have an ML version of this. So that's more for drift monitoring and responses from a model on an endpoint to see how, if your model's drifting over time, and it'll automatically try to not remediate it, but it's still the human in the loop. It'll propose a solution and you can approve it if you would like. So I think that's a really cool idea. I'm excited to see where that goes and when it comes out to see it in action more. So this is just kind of showing, how we got here. Manual triage, person at 2 a.m. looking through everything, observability tools like Splunk and other logging tools to find the issue faster. And now agentic remediation, which is the agent actually proposing a fix for you, and you are the approval gate. So yeah, that's one of the cooler agentic things that came out. So now I'm going to talk about Lakeflow. This is a big label for basically all their data engineering tools they have on the platform. Whether that's ingestion, orchestration, building pipelines, that kind of thing, moving data from A to B. All that falls under kind of the Lakeflow label. One thing I mentioned earlier for Ontology is Lakeflow Connect. So this is kind of what powers all the external connections for the ontology. This is essentially a framework they've built to connect to external sources. So they now claim they have over 100. I listed a few of the big ones up there, but they're also introducing now community connectors. So if there's a GitHub repo, you can follow their framework. You can build a custom connector for maybe some non-popular source that's out there, maybe a specific enterprise needs. So that's now in beta. The free tier of Databricks, which is like that completely free tier, you can use connectors for ingestion now as part of that. But yeah, this is just really interesting. A lot of, instead of hand building every single integration, there's a lot more built into Databricks to get you up and running. That's another thing I've seen throughout all of these is, especially the Lakeflow Connect, it's a lot of things to make it more convincing for people to hop onto the platform, make it easier to integrate all your other platforms you already have with Databricks. So this is one of those avenues they're going down, is building all these enabling community connectors. There was a cool little sideshow presentation announcement that I went to, which was about Lakeflow Jobs. And eventually they're kind of doing a big overhaul of Lakeflow Jobs. They're bringing it a lot closer to Airflow, Astronomer. If you've ever used those tools, like actual official orchestrators for multi-platform orchestration. So they're bringing a bunch of different operators in. They said they did like an internal hackathon and they built like 50 of them really quickly. So Snowflake was the one they demoed. They demoed Snowflake and Slack connections on stage. It was a basic demo. They put the Snowflake thing in there. They ran a query. It sent a Slack message after it finished. Wasn't the biggest thing, but it was cool to see that they're now, trying to go into Airflow space a bit more. They're expanding Lakeflow Jobs to include external sources. So, as I mentioned, the client I refer, they have both Databricks and Snowflake. So this would make my life a lot easier if there's a Snowflake connector, because usually there's some like random little Snowflake stored procedure or something that we need to execute after a Databricks ingestion or something like that. And again, this is going to be similar to like the Lakeflow Connect. There's going to be a framework, so you can like build your own operators and connectors and stuff for external platforms. They said it's all going to be committed to a Git repo at some point in time. It hasn't at this point in time, so we'll see when that comes. And this is all running on a new like compute tier within serverless. So instead of like big jumbo Spark compute units, there's these little tiny VMs that will run essentially just a tiny Python script to do the orchestration for you. So those are built at like a separate, cheaper tier than a full Spark cluster. And then there's some new triggering mechanics that they're introducing for jobs. So currently there's like when a table updates, you can trigger a job. When a file lands, you can trigger a job in cron too, of course, just a time-based expression. They're now introducing one of them, the one that I remember the most was SQL expressions. So instead of just, when a table gets some kind of update, you can now set certain, expression that evaluates to true using SQL, and that will kick off the pipeline. So maybe when the count of a table is over 50, when the net revenue is over $1 million, then we want to run this pipeline or something like that. So I think that allows for a lot more customizability in terms of triggering events and stuff, and moves it more towards an orchestrator rather than just a scheduler. So yeah, I just list some bullet points here about, should you switch off of Airflow? Should you not? Again, this is still in beta. I don't think this is going to replace Airflow anytime soon. Airflow is the tried and tested orchestrator platform. It's been around, it's been battle tested, but I'm really interested to see where this goes and how it starts competing a little bit more in the next few years, especially when these start coming out and people start using them. So yeah, this was one of the most exciting. I use Jobs like every day, so I was really excited when I saw there's a Snowflake connector. Going with the zero theme again, we now have zero bus. So Kafka is a whole push system. You can push events from IoT streams into Kafka. That usually requires Kafka is the platform that ingests all that data. Usually requires a lot of infrastructure outside of Databricks to manage that. Zero bus essentially is the infrastructure-free equivalent, fully compatible with standard Kafka on Databricks. So if you have a bunch of IoT streams going into a Kafka stream and going into Databricks, you can now eliminate that extra VM IT infrastructure cost and just push it directly into Databricks without needing any extra infrastructure. This is pretty cool. I don't personally use anything to that degree of pushing IoT data to a Kafka, but I think people who do are going to be really intrigued by this because now they don't need to maintain extra infrastructure. Going to that whole point of usage versus infrastructure cost. Another cool thing, this is kind of leading to my point of bringing other people outside of Databricks into Databricks. So they're bringing the Lakeflow Designer to GA, general access, and this is kind of a more ADF-like interface. So Azure Data Factory, it's all drag and drop UI elements. You connect together, you tell it what to do. This works similar to that, but under the hood, it's still just Spark Python code that it generates. So if you've ever built a job in Databricks, under the hood, it's really just a big YAML file. You can kind of switch back and forth and see the code version versus the UI version. So all the Lakeflow updates seem just to be encouraging people, platform can connect to whatever you need it to connect to. And it works similar to other platforms if you want it to work like another platform. All right, and here's the fun little fast bit at the end. I kind of separated these into two categories. So there's kind of platform level. This LTAP at the top is kind of interesting. I don't fully understand how it works just yet, but the idea is, so they have the Lakehouse, which is your general analytical processing. Then they have Lakebase, which is Postgres on Databricks with a special storage layer. So the idea here is, since Lakebase is storing data on the same area that analytical is storing data, you can kind of benefit off that shared storage layer. So essentially, Lakebase will store it in a format that's compatible with analytical processing, so it can read it faster. And you don't need to copy your data between Lakebase and your standard Lakehouse as you do now. I think that's still in a beta private preview area though. Iceberg v3, which is cool because it has variants. Variants are very helpful, especially when you're doing crazy XML ingestions. So that's v3 now. There's a whole, they've been really expanding their Iceberg REST protocol, which Snowflake now supports. So if you have Unity Catalog, you can just point Snowflake at the Iceberg REST API, can figure out all the tables, and you can have essentially a copy, not a copy, but make that data available within Snowflake really easy without having to do a bunch of overhead work. LakeWatch is their security platform they've been working on. That was announced a little bit before the conference, but that was one of the newer announcements this year. Lakebase had a whole bunch of improvements that I didn't feel like talking about. Lakebase was the big thing last year, and then just kind of the stuff this year, it took a few months to really roll out, and then it took a few more months for it to get really where they said it was going to get. But so it's kind of where they proposed Lakebase last year is now where it's actually at, in my opinion. Some new serverless options. So there's new GPUs you can now do on serverless compute. So you don't need to provision a whole Spark cluster to get a big GPU if you're doing large model training. You can now access that directly through serverless, which is that more or less instant uptime. So you can start and stop it whenever. And again, that goes to that usability. Usability, what you use is what you're charged for, and not just the infrastructure itself. Some more on the ecosystem and governance side. Unity AI Gateway I brought up. So that's essentially a standard entry point for all your different AI models. So you can put governance and cost controls on there and control how people are using your models across different apps and stuff through a standard endpoint. Marketplace had huge updates. You can put a lot more stuff into Marketplace now. You can find a lot more stuff in Marketplace. That's, you know, whether that's agents themselves, MCP servers you can find on there, you know, more data that's queryable. There's a lot. They've expanded Marketplace a lot. So there's a lot more you can find on there. A lot of security and compliance stuff, which I listed here and I can't speak too much about, to be honest. Open sharing is another cool one. That used to be called Delta sharing, but now they've expanded it to more than just Databricks. So they dropped the Delta name and put open on it. So now you can do the no copy shares to other platforms. And their big one is always Snowflake. They love to mention Snowflake, except in terms of interoperability. Then they have Customer Lake, which is you can store customer data on. I didn't look too much into that. I just know it's a newer thing. Yeah, so that's really the whole kind of rundown of at least what I thought was the cooler things that came out of this. So some key takeaways, you know, Databricks is really trying to get enterprise grade agents on their platform and have people build enterprise grade agents on their platform. So what might have been like Databricks was thinking about AI in the past, now they're fully embraced it and they're putting frameworks on there to support nearly any use case you can think of with agents, at least at this point in time. Whether that's testing them, monitoring them, deploying them, creating them, vibe coding them, lots of different ways to create them and manage them. You know, the people who really benefit from all these are the people who actually use them. They put their data on Databricks, they set up all those external connectors, they get Ontology running, they connect that with their, you know, their what's now called Genie agents, not Genie spaces. And yeah, those will be the teams that get the most out of all of this, is the teams that really embrace this new agentic world that Databricks is really building a framework for. So that just about wraps up my presentation. Are there any questions or anything? All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I hope you got something out of it.
Good job.
Thank you. Any questions online or anything, Ben?
We do not have any questions online.
Sounds good.
So I'll give it another minute or so, then we'll close the online portion.
No questions online? Do we have a Japanese translator in there?
Yeah, in a minute, then we'll start the raffle portion.
Yeah, sounds good.
Glad everyone showed up, right? Raffle.
Yeah, there's some swag over here.
I'm glad Tyler brought astronomer. They're actually
We can pull a yellow
socks.
Oh, okay. So it looks like we got a
Synergy.
Databricks beanie. It's got
Yeah.
the little Databricks logo. We got a 7-Eleven socks, partnered with Databricks. They're Databricks X 7-Eleven socks, I think.
Not the, she
So
said
these are from last year. I found looking for some swag to bring here today.
And then I mentioned Airflow. Astronomer is the managed version of Airflow. So there's a pair of Airflow socks up, or Astronomer socks up here too.
What happened to all the t-shirts?
Oh, I've got some. But I decided
He's
to bring
holding
these
them
for-
on.
Well,
I'll wear 'em, yeah.
Well, I think you're gonna do a bigger one next time,
So,
right?
Yeah, next session, so I got my Databricks hoodie this year. So it's a nice one. I didn't wear my hoodie from last year.
You mean the
Oh,
jacket,
my
right? Like
jacket,
that
yeah,
super
yeah.
jacket,
So
yeah.
I'll raffle that one out this year. Or,
Yeah,
this month.
if you go to the conference and you get any, I think it's any badge, yeah, you get like a really nice, like probably at least like $120 jacket. Like it's a nice jacket. It's from like a tailor around there or something. So it's got like the Databricks like embroidered in it. It's like black and gray. It looks nice. So yeah, I think you're gonna be raffling off one of those next time.
All the jackets were certified.
Yeah, I think yours you didn't put the patches on, right? So it's just the
I didn't put the
Databricks.
patches
It's
on.
just the Databricks
So
jacket. So nobody can steal
I
the
don't
certification.
want- yeah, people walk around with my patch.
Yeah, because when there's like a little tablet you can fill out, you can like
Yeah.
choose what patches you want and where it goes and stuff. So I got one of those this year. But yeah,